Hello and welcome back to another Rush Duel Links deck profile. Today we're taking a look at one of the brand new decks, so it's kind of a mix and match of an old deck and a new deck, but this is Hero Gaia. So Hero Gaia makes use of the new Gaia cards that we got from Challenge deck, Gaia the Fierce Knight, as well as some of the older hero cards and the new hero boss monster that we got, Elemental Hero Burst Wingman from the latest box. But first things first, we should take a look at the skill, because this kind of brings the whole deck together. So this is Chivalrous Celerity. Can be activated if all the monsters with 1600 or more attack in your constructed deck are monsters with 2300 attack and 2100 defense, and or level 5 or lower dragon type normal monsters. So this is intended to be used with basically Gaia the Fierce Knight and Curse of Dragon, which means any of the high level monsters won't really be able to fit in because the skill is a little bit restrictive. There are a couple that can slip through, but none of them are really worth mentioning. Notably, this doesn't put any restriction on our low level monsters, so if there's any kind of low level strategy that's kind of its own contained thing, we can use that, which is what we're doing with the heroes, but this also has been seeing some play with Metarian as well. But we can send one normal monster from your deck to the graveyard and make one face up level 5 or higher monster on your field gain 600 attack until the end of this turn. Then you can add one normal monster and or polymerization from your deck and or graveyard to your hand once per duel. So first off, we have to have a level 5 or higher monster on our field in order to activate this effect. This is usually the pain point if we don't get to a level 5 or higher monster, which the deck does quite easily, but there are some cases where you just don't get to that. You don't really get to play the game. But basically when we do this, we send a normal monster from our deck to the graveyard. This will almost always be the Curse of Dragon. Then we'll boost up the attack of all our monsters by 600. Curse of Dragon now being in the graveyard now means that the battle-tested Gaia the Fierce Knight is now online, and we can use that to create a fusion, and it kind of just gets all the plays going. But we can also use this to send one of our elemental heroes to the graveyard, which can also be pretty cool. The other part of this effect is basically a free +2. We get to add polymerization and any normal monster from our deck or graveyard to our hand, which basically sets up a good fusion play. The best part about this is that we can basically always get this fusion off as long as we have at least one space on the field. Sometimes it can get a little bit difficult to fuse if we've got, let's say, 2 monsters on the field already, but thanks to polymerization, we can fuse them straight from our hand and just get them straight onto the field, which is really good. So I guess it will start in the extra deck, since that is where kind of all of our big bosses are. And the first card is Gaia, Conqueror of Champions. This is a really cool card. This is a limit 1 card and we only have 1 copy of it. So 2600 attack, 2100 defense, level 7. Okay, that's a little bit annoying just because like Combustion Crisis, for example, can really affect this deck, which can get a little bit frustrating. But it's made using Gaia the Fierce Knight and Curse of Dragon during the main phase that you special summon this card. So we only get this effect once, we don't get it every turn. Shuffle 1 monster from your graveyard into the deck, except for a magical knight type monster. This turn, this card can attack directly, or we can destroy a spell trap on the opponent's field. So 2600, which could potentially go up to 32 if we have our skill still after we summon this. 32 direct attack is pretty good. We've already seen that in the Dragon Fusion deck and how powerful that can be on the Mirror Gear Star F. But also popping back row, really good. So this card is just all around fantastic. The only issue we really have with this card is that it is a magical knight. We don't really have any magical knight support at the moment, as well as the fact that we only get this effect the turn it's summoned and we only have the 1 copy. So we have to use recycling effects if we want to use this more than once. And I do think it's very rare that you actually get to use Conqueror of Champions more than once in a duel. Next up, we have Swift Gaia the Dragon Champion, a really cool card made using any warrior type monster with 2100 defense plus Curse of Dragon. What this does mean is we can make it using the Swift Gaia the Fierce Knight, or we can use a battle-tested Gaia from our hand before its name has changed. So it's a bit more versatile, but we can send the top card of our deck to the graveyard. This card inflicts piercing damage, and if we have 0 cards in our hand, we can draw a card. So being able to get that free draw is really good. So getting your hand empty can be really powerful, but the piercing is just really strong, especially since, again, with the skill, we can get this up to 32, a 32 pierce, and quite often we can get out more than one of this in a single turn. A 32 pierce and a 26 pierce is really strong. You can apply a lot of pressure, and if you have the correct back row, you can even survive a dragon onslaught. Next up, we have our Elemental Hero fusions, and the first one we have here is Elemental Hero Burst Wingman. So made using Avian and Burstinatrix. This card must be fusion summoned. We can send the top card of our deck to the graveyard, then 1 face-up warrior type monster on your field gains 1000 attack, which most of the time will be itself, putting up to 3100 attack, until the end of your opponent's next turn. So this is a lingering attack boost that you get to keep all throughout your opponent's turns. This thing will be a resting 3100, which is really good. But then we can also destroy a back row on the opponent's field, which again, really, really powerful. That means we don't necessarily have to use Conqueror of Champions to pop back row because we have easy access to back row hate from Burst Wingman, which is really, really good. And then finally, we have Elemental Hero Flame Wingman. This is the good old golden boy. Basically, this does come up occasionally where you can use this to close out games. If your opponent has set 3, obviously this will get some burn damage in, ideally if your opponent has attack points. But also, don't forget, our skill can give our monster an extra 600 attack, so this is effectively a 2700 attack with that burn effect, which is really, really good. So now we'll take a look at the main deck, and the first card is Battle-Tested Gaia the Fierce Knight. So this is Gaia the Fierce Knight stats, it's level 7. We contribute summon this card in attack position by attributing a level 5 or higher monster. This is almost always going to be Curse of Dragon, but occasionally this can come up. We want to tribute over, let's say, a spent Conqueror of Champions, for example. We can send the top card of our deck to the graveyard. Then this turn, this card's name becomes Gaia the Fierce Knight. Then you can fusion summon by shuffling this card from your field and one monster from your graveyard into the deck as material. Which means as long as our Curse of Dragon's in the graveyard, which it should be because of our skill, we can always have access to our fusion monsters, which is really, really good. This is just a very consistent way to get your fusion monsters online, and Battle-Tested Gaia is just an absolutely fantastic boss monster. Then we're on the one copy of Swift Gaia. I went back and forth on using this, but overall, I think I do like having it. I think the games where we lost were the games where we hard bricked, and the bricks were primarily on a bunch of spell cards, or if we just couldn't find a boss to turn on our skill. So Swift Gaia does work quite nicely for that. It is just a 2300 that we can summon from our hand a lot of the time, as well as the fact we can use it to fuse into our Swift Gaia, so another really good use for it. The only real negative with Swift Gaia is we could potentially just draw a bunch of tribute monsters and not really get to play the game. And it is also a limit 3, which does limit the amount of limit 3s we are allowed to play, so that can get a little bit annoying. But I have enjoyed using this card so far, and so far it's been pretty good. Next up, we're on Rising Hero Argent. Reveal 1 level 6 or 7 warrior type monster in your extra deck. Excavate the top 4 cards of your deck. You can add up to 2 excavated normal monsters listed as materials of the monster you revealed to meet the requirement to your hand. Place the others in the bottom of your deck. So, ideally, this is at least a +1. You use this effect to just get an extra body, and then you can use that body. But the absolute best result is that we do get 1 of each, and then we can create a fusion play. But Rising Hero Argent is one of those cards that quite often doesn't actually end up resolving, and you don't actually end up getting any value of it at all. And that is a little bit frustrating, but it does come with the territory. Since we are playing a 30-card deck, though, it does come off a little bit more often than it does in OCG. Then we have Rising Light Angel Essel, and Essel is really, really cool in this deck because we want to be filling our graveyard with cards. We're playing things like Talismanic Seal Array, we're playing things like Star Restart, we're playing things like the Battle-Tested Gaia, who wants us to specifically have the Curse of Dragon in the graveyard. There are a lot of cards that we want to be getting into our graveyard to set up our plays, so Essel's really good for that. On top of the fact, if Essel is able to summon out one of our boss monsters, then we are good to go. We effectively get out a boss that we can then use the skill will then send the Curse of Dragon. Assuming we have a Battle-Tested out, we then need to use this effect. Everything just kind of falls into place as soon as we get high-level monster onto the field, and Essel is a really good way to get that, and it also just kind of synergizes with the rest of the deck. Obviously, it's not great if we go first, but it still does have 1000 defense, which means it's not going to get pierced over for a ridiculous amount of damage, which is still pretty good. Next up, we have 2 copies of Piercing Samurai. Again, it does have that 1000 defense, which is quite nice. There is a lot of piercing going around, so we don't really want to be playing any monsters that are particularly low defense. But this is a 1200 monster that can give warriors piercing. Now, we do have things like the Swift Gaia and the Battle-Tested Gaia, which can get piercing, but primarily we want to be using this with things like Burst Wingman or Flame Wingman to give them piercing to get in for even more damage. Sometimes, though, we do end up using Piercing Samurai in itself, which is also just fine. Sometimes just getting a little bit of extra poke can be all you need to close out a game, and so far it has been pretty good in testing, but I'm not convinced Piercing Samurai is going to be in the finished build. This is just, again, our day 1 build. Then we have the Curse of Dragon. We're only playing the 1 copy. Some people have been playing more than 1. I think 1 copy should be fine. In testing, it's been fine. The actual irritating thing of this card is we have had so many games where we have just opened Curse of Dragon. It's just a one-of, it's basically a garnet. We want to send it to the graveyard using our skill, but we have just opened this card so many times that it does get a little bit frustrating at times. Other than that, though, it's been fine. We basically just want to get this into the graveyard so that we can send it back into the deck using Battle-Tested Gaia, but we can just tribute this out and get this up to 26 using our skill, so even then, it's not that bad. Then we have the 3 Avian and the 3 Burstinatrix. They have okay stats. Burstinatrix is the lowest defense in the deck with 800, but it's still important for the fusion, so it's the reason it's here. We do have Polymerization. This is very important for our skill, because this basically lets us occasionally make these really ridiculous bombastic plays. The actual ideal situation is that we have the Polymerization, we use it, make a really cool fusion, Then we can use our skill on our new fusion that we've made, get back the polymerization and use it again. If that comes up, we can make these absolutely disgusting plays where we could end on 2 or maybe even 3 fusion monsters very, very easily, have all their effects go off, wipe all your opponent's back row, get a bunch of piercing, get a load of damage, and absolutely destroy your opponent. There was a game we played today in a tournament where if we had simply milled an extra card to turn on our Talisman Accelerate, we would have turned to OTK'd our Dragon Fusion opponent, playing obviously the best deck in the game. So this deck really does have teeth, and if you do high roll a little bit, it can get actually disgusting. The polymerization, especially good if we're using these big high tribute monsters, because we don't have to basically tribute summon them at all, we can just use them from hand, but also really good if our field is clogged and we have 1 free space, we can use it to just get the monster out in that empty space. Then we have Star Restart. Star Restart is really good in this deck because, again, we have easy access to getting Cursor Dragon into the graveyard, and we can bring back Cursor Dragon with Star Restart, which then does enable, for example, our battle-tested Gaias. So there is quite a lot going on there. On top of the fact we can use this to get back any of our elemental heroes, as well as fusion, to make any kind of extra fusion play. The card is just really, really good in this deck. The only real negative of Star Restart is we don't have any way to search the fusion. So we have to just kind of hope we draw into the fusion, get fusion online, and then bring it back using the Star Restart, which is why we're only playing the 2 copies, because I don't really like playing more than 2 if we've only got the 3 copies of fusion. Then there's Talisman Accelerate. TSA is very important for this deck. First off, recycling cards can be really important, as well as cards in the extra deck, because we want to be able to reuse these fusion monsters again and again and again and again. Don't forget that because of the way Battle Tested works, it continuously puts the materials back into our deck, which means we should always have access to them later on in the game, so our grind game should be really, really good. On top of the fact, this deck can sometimes struggle with just really big guys. Like some maximum monsters, for example, are just a little bit too big for us to deal with. We did have a game today where we played against the Worm Maximum, and we just couldn't attack over it. We just couldn't deal with it. The Talisman Accelerate, definitely a must. We were playing 3 copies at one point, but I think 2 has felt a little bit better because we were having a couple of bricky games where we'd open too many spell traps, so I think 2 has worked quite well. Then we have the 3 copies of Fusion, just an absolute necessity. We have gone back and forth whether we like 2 copies or 3 copies. I've ended on 3 just because I really like having 2 copies of Star Restart, and I don't really like the 2-2 split. As well as if we don't find Fusion, Star Restart doesn't do anything. And if we don't get our fusions into rotation, our elemental heroes don't really do anything. So finding Fusion early is really, really important. Again, I'm not sure if 3 is the right number, but it's the number we've gone with for now. And then we have Trap Hole, and some people are probably looking at this and going, that's a weird choice. So Trap Hole isn't actually in too bad of a spot right now. Trap Hole is okay into Psychic, it's pretty good into Dragon, because both of those decks do want to normal summon their guys out. But it is especially good into Gaia itself, because we don't special summon our battle-tested Gaia, we do have to tribute summon it, and that's what a lot of the rest of this does. We also have to normal summon Avian, we have to normal summon Burstinatrix, and we can use Trap Hole to interfere with these plays. Because what do the fusion monsters do? Well, after it's been summoned, Gaia can just pop back row. After it's been summoned, Burst Wingman can pop back row every turn, which means something like Negate Attack won't get a chance to even be used, whereas Trap Hole on the normal summon of a battle-tested Gaia can absolutely shut down the turn of a Gaia player, which is why we've gone on to Trap Hole. Now, I don't think Trap Hole is necessarily the best legend trap in the current meta, but I do think it is useful into just about everything that is in the current meta, up to and including Ancient Gear Golem. So there is some merit to it, and I think especially since Gaia is so popular right now on the ladder, and especially Hero as well, Trap Hole is actually really, really good right now. Again, is it better than Negate Attack? Arguably no, but I think there is an argument for playing Trap Hole over it, and we've been experimenting with it, and we found it to be pretty good. Then there's Slime. Slime, again, really good against Gaia. Now, there are some decks that Slime is really good against. The rest of the meta, for example, Dragons, don't really care about Slime most of the time. Psychic, again, can play around Slime, so Slime isn't as useful. But Slime is still really, really good into exactly Gaia. Because this deck is running around so much, as long as it doesn't get popped by your opponent's guys, it's really good at just saving your life. And then there's Forever Freeze. This is basically in here just to stop dragons. So we have 2 cards that are actually pretty good into dragons specifically, because the dragon matchup for this deck is not fantastic. The dragon matchup is still really, really kind of bad. Like, we can beat dragons. We have beaten several dragon players. But I feel like if the dragon player is good, if they're playing correctly, and if they don't brick, typically dragons will win this matchup. It is dragon favored. So some other little things we have been experimenting with. We did actually try King's Majesty for a bit with Babysitter Goat. The logic is King's Majesty is really good into things like the dragon deck that we're not necessarily particularly favored in. And our skill can send any normal monster to the graveyard. So we can just send Babysitter Goat to the graveyard and turn on King's Majesty, which is pretty cool. We actually found a decent amount of success with that. The other cards we have been trying was Avian Spell Tactics. I think this card is still really good, especially because it combos really well with Argent, but it's really hard to find room in this deck when it already feels so stuffed with spells and traps. We don't really want to go overboard. And we already have a lot of back row hate between Burst Wingman and between Conqueror of Champions, so I feel like it wasn't necessary in this deck. But what do we think of the deck? This deck is actually insanely fun. I really, really like this deck. It is really just so much fun. To be fair, I have played a lot of the Gaia deck and the Hero deck in the OCG, so I have played quite a lot of these decks already, but them coming together in Duel Links with the skill Chivalrous Celerity just feels really, really fun. We have easy access to summoning a bunch of bosses, we have a lot of piercing, we have a lot of attack gain, we have a lot of back row hate, we have a lot of consistency. The deck just feels really, really good. The only times we ever really seem to lose with this deck, other than getting like God-handed, for example, is when we brick, when we just open a handful of spell traps, if we open no boss monsters at all, and we just can't really do anything, we just have to set a bunch of weenies and pass. Other than those games, the deck has felt really, really powerful and really, really fun. And I think if a deck feels strong and it feels fun, then that is a great recipe for a winning deck. Realistically, if I was to try and gauge the power level of this deck from the singular day that I have been playing it, in fact, not even a day, I've been playing it for like 4 hours, I would say this deck feels like a tier 1.5 to tier 2 deck. It can play with the big boys. It can take games off the big boys. Is it going to consistently beat them? I'm not sure. I think this deck has an actual not bad matchup into the Psychic deck, but then saying that it might just be the Psychic players we played against haven't been super duper great. It does still feel like it's really bad into the Dragons, but most other things it actually feels pretty strong into. Pretty much anything else other than the two top dogs, this deck feels like it has a pretty advantageous matchup, and that I think is a really good sign going forward. I also think this is probably, at least Gaia, at least the Gaia part of this deck, and possibly Heroes as well, and possibly in their own separate decks, are probably the two winners of this latest box, so I am looking forward to playing the pure versions of them in the future. But so far, I've had a ton of fun with this. I think this deck is really, really good. This is definitely easily coggable, and possibly really good to take to a tournament. We did just see a tournament finish with pure Gaia taking the win, and we did see a Gaia Metarian list also topping in that event. So there definitely is some really cool cooking going on, and we'll be able to see some more experimentation going forward with these brand new cards. But let's find some replays so I can show you what I've been talking about.